and Sparrow.
I don't get out much.
Praise. God bless
Sal,
you.
God bless you too, man. That was awesome piano playing last night. I was impressed, Sal. Awesome stuff, man.
It was.
I feel, oh, thank you, because I feel kind of embarrassed. It was not the best piano. It was out of tune, and I was not in good form. So, but thank you.
Well, I thought, yeah, that was pretty
I
awesome.
did too. I thought it was awesome.
So, I got to sing a few words because Olive said she liked Frank Sinatra, and I'm glad I slipped that in. So
you
Yes.
did good, Sal.
Mhm.
Yes, you did.
huh?
Nice.
You did very good.
Oh, thank you.
How was your
Are
stream?
you gonna sing him
Yeah,
again?
yeah, let's hear it.
Or are you gonna save it for talent night tomorrow?
Okay, all right. Let me see if I get.
Well, praise is here, so he could hear.
You got to be here tomorrow night too, because tomorrow night's talent night.
Sal's on center monitor here.
Strangers in the night, exchanging glances, wandering in the night. What were the chances we'd be sharing love before the night was through? Something in your eyes was so inviting, something in your smile was so exciting, something in my heart told me I must have you. Strangers in the night, two lonely people, we were strangers in the night, up to the moment when we said our first hello. Little did we know, love was just a glance away, a warm embracing dance away. And ever since that night, we've been together, lovers at first sight, in love forever. It turned out so right for strangers in the night.
Beautiful.
Brother,
Yay.
Sal. That was really good.
That was awesome.
That was
Wow.
I
really
enjoyed that.
cool.
I like that. Good stuff.
And thank you. And welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. That was just the opening there for a little bit of fun. And I'm joined by Emory. And now we're gonna we're gonna go into full nerd mode now. So Emory, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Emory Moynagh. I have a website and a YouTube channel entitled In His Image, inhisimage.blog, and then just In His Image on YouTube. Feel free to check those out. I have content planned. I haven't done anything in like 2 months because I'm a graduate school student and I'm writing a thesis. But I have content planned that I'm hopefully recording tomorrow night. That's the plan, if everything goes according to plan and nothing breaks between now and then. So there will be content coming. And I'm also trying to maybe arrange a few interviews with people who are a lot smarter than I am. So, anyways, go ahead, Sal.
So we're just going to continue the show that we did last night, and I knew it could go up to 2 hours, and it did, and not even finish. So this is just the second half, and this is just to introduce a little bit. Dr. Sanford and I, and Ola Oster, very respected scientist, and then Bill Basner, emeritus professor of mathematics. The four of us teamed up to make a chapter that was in a reference work that got published by Springer Nature, a chapter in a book. That book now is on university library shelves. The chapter was critical of Darwinian evolution, but it wasn't anything that really we tried to insist on. This was what evolutionary biologists themselves have said of their own field. Now, that might sound surprising, and the problem is there's a disconnect. You have kind of the elites publishing in obscure journals, or it's not really hyped up, and the rest of the evolutionary community doesn't seem to be aware of it, because I confront them with it and it just goes over their head. I'm just like, okay. So part of that reason is the one segment of evolutionary biology that's very specialized and mathematical is population genetics, heavy on the math. And they're the ones that are starting to, in that community, this kind of confession of a problem kind of emerged. And I started to see it. And I think what has happened is they'll write about it occasionally, just file it away, and it seems like they hope someone else will figure out what the problem is and solve it. And some of them, very senior, like Richard Lewontin, gave up on the field. And I'll give quotes to that effect, and you'll see what I mean by gave up on the field. That's kind of vague, but I'd rather provide quotations in his own words and by his biographers to describe it. People that are much more acquainted with the situation. And Brian Stevens asked, he said, "Hi, Sal, have I missed anything?" Well, if you were there last night on Praise's channel, I had been singing. So I was singing Strangers in the Night. I got invited maybe to sing tonight. Oh, Nice Girl is here. Nice to see you. This is actually great. We have some people that are graduate students, and this channel does tend to cater to my fellow victims who are in graduate school.
Yeah, victims is right.
And so we try to cover, things at that level, because these are things that Christians who are in school they'll be wrestling with these questions. So Brian Stevens asked, have I missed anything? Yeah, only the singing. This is actually part 2 of a show we did yesterday, where we just surveyed literature that evolutionary biologists themselves have commented on their field, and we didn't get through half the quotes and commentary. It took 2 hours, and we're trying to be very thorough because we're trying to make the case that neo-Darwinism has failed on many levels. First in terms of coherency, and then also experimental and field observation. And so we'll assume, even for the sake of argument, that common descent is true, but the mechanism of natural selection sorry, there was something in the side chat here. So we're arguing that mechanisms of natural selection that whole thing is really falling apart. It's an incoherent theory, and that may sound astonishing. Just to extinguish some things, there's a question: did you say dinos were birds? No. Had they ever any reason to say that they had feathers? I don't study paleontology. I don't think dinos are birds, and even if they were, I think God still created everything, and that's the important thing. And I think the universe and our world is less than 10,000 years old. So I don't think birds evolved from dinosaurs or whatever. We could say that they have similar architectures, so I'll leave it at that. That's kind of off the topic, but thank you for asking, Cram. And Cram, I think, is one of my fellows at McLean Bible, and there's whole drama coming up in the next 2 days, and jury trials and stuff, and I'm just going crazy with all the things that are going on in my life. But Emory, if you had some thoughts, we're going to just maybe review a little bit.
I don't have any thoughts on that. I just want to just throw something at Crom. I'm in tune with some people who are working on that particular problem. Be looking for a research paper in the creationist community on that topic in the soon-ish future. I know one's coming. So
okay, that sounds great. Well, if I could summarize this, where all this is going, it says Lynchs co-authored a paper. He was not the lead author, someone named Couchy. It's a 2017 paper. This document is a draft, meaning we're circulating it. I'm circulating it around, trying to edit it. And there's tons of references I didn't include because that's the agonizing part. It's like, I don't feel like adding the references at this point. People want to Google this, they can find it, but eventually this document's going to be formalized and it will be circulated. So this paper said in the title, genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. Genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. And if you think about it, this is really bad. That means if I had to summarize the fundamental problem is that evolutionary biologists keep saying, fitness always gains, and they try to suggest that it's inevitable that complexity will arise. Well, this is a powerful counterexample, and it's not isolated. That you could be saying evolution is improving, quote unquote, the population in terms of a fitness gain, but it's actually destroying their genome. So that in sum, that's the organizing sentence for the entire document here. And we just elaborate on that on many levels. Emory, if you had some thoughts, and I'm just gonna review a little bit.
No, I'm turning my mic off whenever I'm not talking because apparently I'm getting some echo. So apologies for that. Let me try and mess with this a little bit.
I'll try to do the same.
But basically, the organizing principle of natural selection that Darwin stole, because Darwin didn't invent it. It was already circulating in the literature at the time. Darwin just grabbed it from. There were several people who had proposed it pre-Darwin. One of whom was a creationist named Edward Blythe, and he actually kind of put the modern creationist spin on it at the time. But that the organizing principle that Darwin funneled into his theory basically doesn't have the kind of power that the evolutionists like to say it does in textbooks. And within the community itself, this is a known fact. They just don't like to tell you that, and they don't like to admit it outside of their closed peer review circles. So anyway, I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
Okay, so I cited all the examples of this. I think Alan Orr was a great example. He was criticizing. Sometimes the reason this comes out is because they're having fights within their community and they want to publicly humiliate someone. So this is how it spills out. So Alan Orr and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins. So there's the ultra-Darwinists like Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins. And Alan Orr was, you could sense that they were fighting against each other. And Alan Orr came out publicly and said, this ultra-Darwinism is ridiculous. The idea, and he said, so I'll just try to read some of this before. Dennett is fond of speaking of selection as leading organisms through design space. Selection lifts organisms along ramps of good design. Although this imagery is often useful, it invites two subtle misconceptions about adaptation. The first is that natural selection cares about design. In reality, selection sees only birth, death, reproduction, and knows nothing of design. Selection, sheer cold demographics is just as happy to lay waste to the kind of design we associate with engineering as to build it. Consider the eyes of cave organisms who live in total darkness. If eyes are expensive to make, selection can wreck their exquisite engineering just as surely as it built it. An optic nerve with little or no eye is most assuredly not the sort of design one expects on an engineer's blueprint, but we find it in Gomerus minus. Whether or not this kind of evolution is common, it betrays the fundamental error in thinking of selection as trading in the currency of design. And brief comment, Emory, and we're just gonna, blast through this review.
The one comment I want to make here is that Dawkins, Dennett, and a lot of the people who would be classified as new atheists are atheists before they're Darwinists, or is a Darwinist before he's an atheist. So that's why you have this philosophical fight going on, is because Dennett wants to promote atheism at all costs. Whereas, or it's more about promoting the Darwinism than it is promoting the atheism. He doesn't so much care. I mean, he cares about being an atheist. I'd imagine he's an atheist. I don't know for sure, but I think he is. He wrote a book with Jerry Coyne, so I'd imagine he's an atheist. But in Orr's case, he cares a little bit less about winning an atheist argument than he does about let's actually correctly articulate Darwinian theory. Whereas Dawkins and Dennett, it's more about we're atheists, we're going to push that in your face, and that's how it works.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter that scientists of high caliber like E.O. Wilson and others think very low of their science. They are promoters. So, and so, or at the time, so this was like 1996, 2002, I have to get the date straightened out, had said, we don't know if this type of evolution is common. We're finding out it is. This kind of reduction. And so title of Eugene Koonen's paper, Genome Reduction is the Dominant Mode of Evolution. And in red, so everything in red are quotes by evolutionists themselves. And we were actually, Emory and I were kind of laughing that it's like, did creationists pay these guys to say this? I mean, that's just obviously that's hyperbole. You know, we're not being totally serious, but it sounds very creationist-like. So I'll just read this. Koonen's own words. A common belief is that evolution generally proceeds towards greater complexity at both the organismal and genomic level. Numerous examples of reductive evolution of parasites and symbionts notwithstanding. However, recent evolutionary reconstructions challenge this notion. Two notable examples are the reconstructions of the complex archaeal ancestor and the intron-rich ancestor of eukaryotes. In both cases, evolution in most of the lineages was apparently dominated by extensive loss of introns, respectively. These and many other cases of reductive evolution are consistent with a general model composed of two distinct evolutionary phases. The short explosive innovation phase that leads to an abrupt increase in genome complexity, followed by a much longer reductive phase, which encompasses either neutral ratchet of genetic material loss or adaptive genome streamlining. Quantitatively, the evolution of genomes appears to be dominated by reduction and simplification, punctuated by episodes of complexification. And Emory, if you had some thoughts, we're just going to keep blowing through this to page 2. So.
No, let's go ahead and push this one through and just get to where we left off last night.
Okay. So the problem is natural selection has. How can you say that it works one way and what causes it to shift gears? And it's just still hand waving. We'll go into that. Another quote by Michael Lynch, which will be important. I call it Lynch's Principle. There are many more ways to disrupt rather than improve genomic function. There are many more ways to disrupt rather than improve genomic function. I call it, one way of phrasing it, I call it Lynch's Principle. There are many ways to break, but few ways to make. Last night we went into this in more detail just to be fair to Lynch so that he's not quoted totally out of context. So I've been trying to be careful to just read the whole abstract and you get to hear it, I think a representative feel for the point they're making. But even when read in context, I still think this looks really bad for evolutionary theory. And I threw on the table the idea of a different definition of complexity among engineers, the ID community, the Institute of Creation Research, the Discovery Institute. We're still trying to work out how to define complexity because everyone has different words for it, and that's another thing. I threw out kind of my simple thing based on Lynch's Principle. You can get kind of a qualitative, informal measure of complexity in terms of the ways that its systems and capabilities can be broken. So the more ways that you can break it, that's a measure of complexity. So like in by way of analogy, and I didn't mention this yesterday, when you have a long password, that's considered higher complexity than a short password, because there are more ways that it can go wrong when you're typing it in if it's a long password. If you have some thoughts, Emory?
Nope, let's just blast through to where we picked up.
Okay. I pointed out kind of the humorous book, Survival of the Sickest, Why We Need Disease. There is such a rarity of quote unquote beneficial mutations. Even in the Darwinian sense, it's very hard to get beneficial mutations. And we briefly defined beneficial in the population genetic sense is just the number of babies that make it to reproductive age, or that make it to the point where they start reproducing. So formally, we call absolute fitness W, capital W, equals fertility times viability. So fertility is the number of offspring, viability is how viable the offspring are, because a lot of the offspring will die before they start reproducing. And there's all sorts of mathematical problems with that. We covered it. And we're starting now to get to the point where we're going to analyze this in terms of the problems of it, the definition mathematically. And yeah, so go on, Emory.
I'm muted for a reason. I'm just letting you go through this as fast as we can to pick up where we left off. You're muted, so.
Okay, I was noting the side chat. If you see anything interesting, why don't you interrupt me? Guys, apologies in advance if you're wanting me to comment on something. I may not be noticing it because I'm really focusing on this project here. But I really do want to interact with the audience to some level because you support this channel. And so you're special. We'll just try to, try to meet each other's needs as best we can. So lest you think I'm stretching that there's problems defining fitness, listen to this evolutionary biologist, Andreas Wagner. He says, however, it is hard to define rigorously and even more difficult to measure. However, fitness is hard to define rigorously and even more difficult to measure. An examination of fitness and its robustness alone would thus not yield much insight into the opening questions. Instead, it is necessary to analyze on all levels of organization the systems that constitute an organism and that sustain life. I define such systems loosely as assemblies of parts that carry out well-defined biological functions. And this sounds very much like Michael Behe, who defined irreducible complexity as a single system composed of several well-matched parts, well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function of the system. So that was Wagner, and now someone who's very, very senior, a second generation pioneer of neo-Darwinism, Richard Lewontin. He writes, and this is such a good essay, and this is almost where we left off yesterday. The difficulties of the concept of fitness are, unfortunately, much deeper than the problem of frequency and density dependence. And we mentioned that basically means if you have a population of different allele frequencies, that changes the fitness of the alleles. That's really bad mathematically. And it starts to show our definition of fitness is really on shaky ground, sinking sand. And he realized that. The problem is that it is not entirely clear what fitness is. The problem is that it is not entirely clear what fitness is. Darwin took the metaphorical sense of fitness literally. The natural properties of different types resulted in their differential fit into the environment in which they lived. The better the fit to the environment, the more likely they were to survive, and the greater their rate of reproduction. This differential rate of reproduction would then result in a change of abundance of the different types. In modern evolutionary theory, however, fitness is no longer a characterization of the relation of the organism to the environment that leads to reproductive consequences. but is meant to be a quantitative expression of the differential reproductive schedules themselves, i.e. W equals FA times VA. However, how then are we to assign relative fitnesses of types based solely on their properties of reproduction? But if we cannot do that, what does it mean to say that a type with one set of natural properties is more reproductively fit? This problem has led some theorists to equate fitness with outcome. If a type increases in a population, then it is by definition more fit. But this suffers from two difficulties. First, it does not distinguish random changes in frequencies in finite populations from changes that are a consequence of different biological properties. Finally, it destroys any use of differential fitness as an explanation of change. It simply affirms that types change in frequency, but we already knew that. And so that was the big one. So just to elaborate the way I understand it. Okay, a bear is normally a polar bear is normally a land-based, or you could say ice-based creature. But he does have capability to survive in an aquatic environment. He can swim for miles. There are other mammals that can dive very, very deep into the water. Humans can't do stuff like that. Humans can't fly. They're not adapted to naturally fly like a bat. So in the engineering sense, we have an idea what fitness means to a given environment in terms of the equipment. Like whales are equipped to operate as a mammal in the water, in deep water. They're not operate like mammals that can live in the desert. And so the engineering sense of fit makes intuitive, sense to an engineer or common sense. What Lewontin is coming to realize, it's like, gee, the way we define fitness in evolutionary biology is totally useless because you're just counting organisms. And you have that W equals FA times VA. There's no accounting in that formula for the capabilities of the organism in an engineering sense versus its environment. And Emory, if you have any, we're pretty close to just starting where we left off now.
No accounting is an understatement. Like fitness is in the way the evolutionists are currently working with fitness. It's just a mess. They ignore things that they shouldn't ignore. They include things that they shouldn't include. It's completely relative. If the environment changes, fitness changes like that. The whole thing is just a mess. Now, if you wanted to tell me, if you were only calculating the fitness and you were specifically saying, hey, it's for this environment, okay, maybe you could make an argument fitness fit for this environment, maybe, but that's not how they apply it, and that's not how they use it. So anyway, go ahead, Sal. Let's get into the Brady stuff.
I don't know why I'm getting that echo, which is really strange. I thought I shut down all the sources. Let me see if I have an open window that's causing me problems. I don't see anything with, are you getting that echo too, Emory?
Yeah, I was hearing it.
I don't know where it's coming from. Let me look over here. I'm gonna shut down one of the, okay. I'm still getting it, guys. I apologize. We'll just try to push through this. I don't know what's causing this nonsense, but anyway, yeah, this is a real bad situation for evolutionary theory, and this isn't creationists pointing this out. The way we got our stuff through peer reviews, we used evolutionary biologists saying it about their own field. And I feel a lot of people have not been aware. I've tried to put in the side chat the the working document, which is a draft, where we have all these quotes and you can think about it. And I wanted to say, you know, when I ran this by students of evolutionary biology, they just brushed it off. I'm just like, guys, this is your field. You ought to be a little bit more interested in this. And they're saying, Sal, you're misinterpreting it. I'm just like, no, I don't think so. Because I've studied this for 2 years and published in it. And this is what the plain reading of what is said is how bad it is. And I'm going to give some more quotes that will show that it is as bad as I'm saying. So first off, this is philosopher of biology, R.H. Brady. He said, the operational forms of the concepts of adaptation and fitness turn out to be too indeterminate to be seriously tested. Ow. And then Brady points out, and I put links in the video description so you could access some, you know, Brady's paper. Take, for example, the satirical German folk saying, which claims that if the cock crows on a manure pile, it will rain, or it won't. What does this really say about experience? Will anything be different if the cock crows? The two sides of the proposition are distinct, but the second part does not specify any observation, for it is simply too broad. One can neither apply nor test the statement, for it fails to specify any particular result. That means the claim is always going to be true. If it can either rain or it won't. Now, to maybe elaborate on the precision of this, and this is where we left off last night. If one said we could win or lose in the game of dice, specifically the pass line and craps and casino games, that would be a statement that is not experimentally testable. So if we say we could win or lose, that's true.
It's definitionally true because those are the only two possible outcomes.
Right. I mean, if you include a tie as kind of half win, half
You
loss.
can't.
Right.
You don't tie in gambling.
Yeah. However, if one said there is a 49.3 chance of winning at the game of dice, that is a testable hypothesis that can be experimentally demonstrated by a large number of trials in accordance with the law of large numbers. And that's where we left off yesterday. So what evolutionary biologists, when I confront them with this, they said, well, you know, Sal, you don't understand evolutionary theory. It can build complexity or it could lower it. And I'm like, you know, no dice, guys, pun intended. You have to tell me how probable it is. Then you can test it. You can't just hand wave and say. And if we have a rarity of examples of sustained construction in it, and that is in contrast to the abundant number of examples of loss of function, you need to put this in your model of how probable it is. It's that slight successive modifications over time will build organs of extreme imperfection and complication, to quote Darwin. Organs like the eye, etc. And greetings, brain bug. And Emory, I'm just going to greet some people while you continue, if you'd like to continue.
Sure. No, I think that's. I think that the Brady paper, and I'm going to remind everybody, by the way, Sal and I read through this whole paper I think it was last year, between his channel and mine. And like we went through, so everything we're going to say from Brady, we elaborated on in much more detail last year. I think it was 4 or 5 2-hour sessions we went through with the Brady paper to get through that whole thing. Something like that. I mean, it was an incredibly long read through, but it was incredibly worth it because the Brady paper is by far one of the best critiques of natural selection I think I've ever seen in the peer-reviewed literature. So,
and I have to credit, I think I could say this, Paul Nelson had passed that paper on to me when I was giving a talk on Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's this ugly rumor. It's like, who is Sal getting married to? Okay, I said that I was, you know, okay. Rumors really burst because I'd mentioned in private that there are girls, plural, that I'm interested in, and obviously there's one that I'm more interested in. We haven't even had a conversation yet. So that's where it is. So, you know.
So you all can take that rumor and stuff it somewhere.
Yeah.
Bring it back out in about 6 years.
So, I mean, you know, I could get turned down several times. And so that's, I don't know. But I mean, I did begin the show singing love songs. So, you know,
you brought that one on yourself, Sal.
Yeah, I brought that on myself.
Sorry.
Well, you know, I'm a sucker for a pretty face, and some pretty girl asked me to sing Frank Sinatra, and I said, "Strangers in the night." I used to be a singer. Okay, while I was in an engineering program at school, I was also a music student, and I'd sing at college dances. So I sang Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley. So, okay, so I brought that rumor on myself.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for you, Sal, given what you started the show with. I really don't. I'm sorry.
So, ladies, I'm going to be possibly on Praise's channel, and I'll be singing. I'll be singing another love song tonight, if the ladies will request it. Okay, so now let's get back to nerd mode here, and all right. So the black is my commentary, and that's what I'm working with Dr. Sanford. So now we're just going to plow through the remainder, and let's see how long we got through this in 36 minutes to review. But I think it was good to spool up the people that were, you know, just joined only, hadn't seen part one. Mm-hmm. So by way of extension, if one said Darwinian mechanisms can increase or decrease complexity, it is not an experimentally testable claim. In the sense, if it does increase or decrease, I mean, in the sense, if you only got decreases, that it's falsifiable in that sense. But as it stands, that's really not a very testable claim any more than it's going to rain or not rain. However, if one says the odds are of 20 necessary simultaneous mutations creating a new feature arising by mutation and selection over several generations within a certain population structure and mutation rate, then the claim is testable. Otherwise, it is a fairly useless scientific claim, and that's the point R.H. Brady was saying. Do you have some comment, Emory?
I don't think, unless you can put numbers to it, it's not testable in the sense that the scientific community talks about testable predictions. If you can't make a prediction and say, okay, this is such and such number is, you know, the probability of this occurring, then you don't have a coherent model that is testable and falsifiable. You just have it will either rain or it won't.
Right. And I will say, to the credit of the biological community at large, they're starting to get measurements on this. This whole thing about reductive evolution and the observational evidence, we're seeing quite a large number of decaying genomes. And we can, you know, some of my work on proteins is trying to characterize what does it really mean to make a de novo protein that's not a homolog of other proteins. Okay, so what ends up happening is people say, look, we got a de novo protein, and it's like, what do you mean? It's basically a homolog. You could put it in an alignment algorithm, and it's going to say it's a homolog. It's not really radically new. Whereas I'm giving a talk, by the way, time out, a little bit of self-promotion here. I will be giving a talk at the Creation Research Society on bioinformatics, and I'll be saying that major protein families follow an orchard rather than a universal tree. And Dr. Dan came on this channel and he said, I agree with that, Sal, because I can't, if I took all the random proteins or all the proteins that we have access to, hypothetically, and put it in an alignment algorithm or some hidden Markov machine that's supposed to detect homology, he said you won't find it. There'll be isolated. There'll be these isolated families that don't have a universal common ancestor. There is, I think, a video by the title "Hit Me with Your Best Shot" or something, or I took the Pat Benatar song, and Dr. Dan was on there. So I just wanted to point out, you have orchards there, and the idea of de novo proteins is, when I mean de novo proteins, I really mean de novo major protein families. So anyway, so let's just kind of plow on. If you had some comment there, Emory.
No, you're the protein expert. I will let you handle the proteins.
We're actually on page 6 of this 8-page essay, so there's hope we're going to finish this tonight. R.H. Brady points out that even eminent scientists like Waddington could not grasp the absurdity of the definition of fitness in evolutionary biology. So the red is Brady quoting Waddington. This is Waddington, okay? But it's mentioned in Brady's paper. Waddington, who I think coined the word epigenetics, Waddington said, the fittest individuals in a population, defined as those which leave the most offspring, will leave the most offspring. And Brady was almost kind of like beside himself. It's like, don't you realize this is kind of like a kind of uninformative statement? So I took the liberty of taking out a parentheses, and I'm just going to quote the bolded portion. Those which leave the most offspring will leave the most offspring.
Wow, that's informative. That tells us a lot right there. That's like pointing at a homeschool family and said they've got the most kids, therefore they've got the most kids.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy has a PhD.
And Waddington is very respected, and he said, but I think he's R.H. Brady goes on to quote the rest of Waddington, and Waddington said, this problem doesn't diminish the genius of Darwin, but independent of that, because I think Lewontin pointed out Darwin's idea was more like the kind of more like the engineering viewpoint of fitness, but the modern definition is W equals FA times VA, where W is absolute fitness, capital W is absolute fitness, FA is fertility or fecundity, which is the number of kids, VA is viability, which is the proportion of kids that survive to reproduce, and that's it. But what does that say? This is essentially saying those which leave the most offspring will leave the most offspring. And we've stated that mathematically in terms of absolute fitness, WA equals FA times VA. It's the same tautology. And yeah, I can give this to an evolutionary biologist, and I challenged someone in a debate, and I said, this isn't working, guys. And they're insistent that this is the right way to define fitness. And it's like, I don't know what to do. I thought I did everything I could to make it clear. So I said, okay, let me dig in the evolutionary literature and let them say it, because they're not going to take my word for it. So, I don't know what to say beyond that, Emory.
Right, and I want to point out here, I get frustrated with that. So I kind of snapped on Waddington a little bit there. But keep in mind, Waddington is a brilliant guy. Like, I was really snippy with him there, but he's a brilliant guy. Guy's got a PhD. I mean, he's no slouch. But that's the definition of fitness that he's playing with. Like that's the definition of natural selection that he's playing with. Really, guys? Like, is that the best you have?
Yeah. And the reason I quoted it, that in summary is what Lewontin spent 2 paragraphs on trying to describe the problem. And he spent a whole paper, and he came to the same conclusion, but it was much more elaborated when he was going into density-dependent selection. He said, okay, we have these alleles, and how do we classify as one allele more fit than another? So now it's good to go back to the actual experiments. He ran a lot of experiments with density-dependent selection. And so the theory goes, if something is more inherently fit than another, it's going to overtake the population. To his horror, that wasn't the case. So, I mean, the idea in the mathematical models, the simplistic ones, is it doesn't matter what proportion of alleles occupy a population. If it's the most fit, it's going to overtake. He found out to his horror that wasn't true. So the one that was most representative tended to affect the fitness of the less representative ones. And you ended up having the one that was overrepresented overtaking the population. And he was kind of horrified at that result. So you can look up, I alluded to it here. I said it's the Santa Fe Bulletin, winter 2003 by Lewontin. You can look it up. And when I confronted evolutionary students, they just brushed me off. It's like, no, you're not interpreting it right. So I'm just like, dude, do you even understand the population genetics of density-dependent selection? Can you work through the math and tell me that you really understand what he's saying? Because if you work through the math, you'll actually see this. And that's what happened when I worked on this project of the Springer Nature publication that's peer-reviewed. And Springer Nature is a respected publisher. It's on university library shelves. We were able to defend it. But when I worked through the math, I said, this is an empty concept. I called John and I said, this looks horrible. This looks like smoke and mirrors. I said, am I that wrong? He said, no, you're not. Your co-author, Bill Basner, feels the same way, and he's a mathematician. And so, what can I say? I provided the quotes. I provided my interpretation. And, I reviewed this with a certain individual who we call Hellbound Speed of Sound now. He's adopted that name. And I gave him R.H. Brady's paper. And at the end of our discussion on R.H. Brady's paper, he said, maybe to save the human race, we have to get dumber and dumber until we all lose our minds. But that's the way selection works. I'm just like, that's exactly the problem. And he thought he was trying to explain this. It's like, don't you see the light, Sal? It's like, no, don't you see the light? Don't you see the problem here? That as fitness is gaining, the genome's getting trashed. You're losing complexity. That's not good. So we can move on to the next one. I'm going to just forego the paragraph I wrote in black because on second thought, I didn't write it well. So I'm going to rewrite it. I'm not going to torture you with something that's going to end up on the editing room floor. If you have any thoughts, we'll just go right to this next quote.
No, let's go ahead.
R.H. Brady quotes Lewontin on the problem of making evolutionary definitions of fitness that can't possibly be tested experimentally. And this is Lewontin, as quoted by R.H. Brady. So this is Lewontin. For what good is a theory that is guaranteed by its internal logical structure to agree with all conceivable observations, irrespective of the real structure of the world? If scientists are going to use logically unbeatable theories about the world, they might as well give up natural science and take up religion. Ow.
Ow is an understatement. I mean, Brady is essentially in quoting Lewontin, and Lewontin, by the way, is not opposed to appealing to evolution as a religious concept. He does so. There's a famous quote from him where he does that. But he's essentially pointing out that, hey, if can't break the theory, if it's unbeatable theories about the world, if you can't break this, if you can't beat it, well, forget science. You're not doing science anymore. You're now doing religion. Like if there's nothing that you can do in the scientist's mind to disprove their point of view, That is a faith commitment. That is not a scientific commitment.
So it's like he's criticizing in his own field, and I'm going to quote some later things that try to I mean, there are nuances to this. He's not against evolutionary biology, but he's expressing frustration in the way it's been formulated. And Lewontin is the one that famously said, we don't want to let the divine foot in the door. And yet he's very frustrated because he spent almost his whole life on this and realized that we're chasing an empty concept. And, you know, people outside the field of evolutionary biology, particularly the engineers, saw this coming. And for the longest time, when engineers would criticize evolutionary stuff, they'll say, well, you know, you're not an evolutionary biologist, you don't understand. And so now here, in light of what's happening, you know, I feel like the engineers are being vindicated. So we've had a lot of outsiders criticizing evolutionary biology. My role in the recent project was to actually look for what evolutionary biologists themselves said, because I felt you could find it there. They strike me as inherently honest people. They may couch the language in kind of subtle ways, so not to be too, you know, blatant. But I think their conscience is bothering them enough, and you have an example of it here. So I'm just going to say this again. It's a beautiful quote. This is one of the better quotes in the whole document here. For what good is a theory that is guaranteed by its internal logical structure to agree with all conceivable observations, irrespective of the real structure of the world? If scientists are going to use logically unbeatable theories about the world, they might as well give up natural science and take up religion. And this echoes that comment by R.H. Brady about the bird sitting on a dung pile. And it predicts that if you see a bird sitting on a dung pile, it's going to rain or it's not going to rain. That's an example of a theory that is unbeatable by its logical structure. So any more comments before we get on to the next painful thing?
Nope. I mean, I think we've analyzed Brady's paper pretty well.
Okay, so that's not the end of it. Okay, this is still not the end of it. Furthermore, even with the vacuous definition of fitness in evolutionary biology, capital W equals FA times VA, and then you can normalize it to get your relative fitnesses. Even with all that, circularly reasoned as it is, there's something problematic. Furthermore, even with the vacuous definition of fitness in evolutionary biology, Patrick Moran and others realize fitness may not even ever maximize for a population, but gets stuck and prevents further advance. I need to correct my English. That's a little sloppy. The fact was highlighted in the 2017 paper. It was a beautiful theory indeed. The rise, fall, and circulation of fitness maximization by Grodwall. And I'll explain this a little bit. It's technical. This ambition, that is to demonstrate fitness always maximizes, came to a halt in the context of the influential objections made by Australian mathematician Patrick Moran in 1963. Okay, so we're going to get into the weeds here. The reason for that is in a single locus model, like kind of Dawkins weasel, fitness maximization looks very reasonable. And so Dawkins weasel is kind of like, if you think about it, you know, me think it's like a weasel. Just think of that as like a single gene. And all you're doing is you're going to select for that little gene till, you know, you take that random string and then bring it closer to me think it's like a weasel. What Patrick Moran realized is it's a different ballgame when you go to multi-loci. Multi-loci plus what they call linkage and epistasis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to go into that. This is like 10 hours of lectures, but he realized that, and they tried to resolve it. You know, they thought, oh, we could just extend the single locus model to the multi-loci. No problem. It's scalable, and crash. and so I'll quote specifically from Joe Felsenstein's graduate level Theoretical Evolutionary Genetics, the 2017 version, commenting on Patrick Moran. It is easy to show that not only can recombination lead to a continual decrease of mean fitness during the course of evolution, but it leads to an equilibrium state which has lowered mean fitness. I'm going to read this again. It is easy to show that not only can recombination lead to a continual decrease of mean fitness during the course of evolution, but it leads to an equilibrium state which has lowered mean fitness. By the way, Dr. Dan, I invited him here to talk about this paper that I wrote with Dr. Sanford. A lot of it's reflected here in this, popularized version. He said, yeah, I agree with that, Sal. And what's there to disagree with? This is probably the top evolutionist in population genetics saying fitness isn't going to maximize. It's not guaranteed. It's not saying it won't, but he's saying it's not guaranteed. And if you have any comments, Emory?
Well, the fact that fitness maximization isn't guaranteed is kind of a big deal, because essentially what that says is some organisms, maybe even a lot of organisms, will never hit peak fitness. All right, and think about this: supposedly the most fit organisms are the ones that survive and reproduce and so on. But if you're never hitting peak fitness, that puts your theory in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it?
Yes. This linkage problem. Now, you can override that through intelligently designing, re-engineering the genome, or some very careful selective breeding, but you have to override what's kind of happening in the wild some way. So this is the problem. What happens in nature isn't, kind of the theoretical result that you're trying to demonstrate. So this was very problematic, and I'm just going to read some more quotes here. The title of this paper by Grodwell here, The Rise and Fall in Circulation of Fitness Maximization, we took that and borrowed part of the title in our Springer Nature chapter. We said, and I've forgotten the title of my own publication. It's Fitness Maximization Evolutionary Dynamical Fitness Maximization in Evolutionary Biology. Okay, Dynamical Systems and Fitness Maximization in Evolutionary Biology. And our reference work was not a research article. It was basically a review to make a reference work. And we relied heavily on insights like this by Grodwell and Felsenstein. So I'll just continue. In 1989, Joseph Felsenstein, 1989, realized the futility of proving evolutionary fitness inevitably maximizes in light of Moran's work. From Felsenstein, 1989, Mathematics versus Evolution, Science 246, another prestigious journal. Felsenstein writes, with enough information, population genetics can be extraordinarily powerful. It is when we must generalize over a wide range of possible models that the intractability of the mathematics becomes infuriating. Sewall Wright and R.A. Fisher derived results that seem to imply that natural selection would act so as to maximize the mean relative fitness of members of a population. It did not take a new generation of theoreticians long to discover holes in this. Systems of linked genes can evolve steadily away from maximum mean fitness. Even Fisher's and Wright's one locus equations turn out to be approximations, sometimes bad ones. If we could discover what quantity was being maximized, it might yield some insights into how the details of the genetic system compromise adaptation. Compromise adaptation. After 20 years of effort, there has been no great progress on the central problem. The genetic system is not designed for the convenience of mathematical theorists. The genetic system is not designed for the convenience of mathematical theorists. All theory has done is disprove postulated generalizations. The mathematical tools at hand have not revolutionized our understanding of the evolutionary process. Many evolutionists will fail to find the clear and simple message that population genetics theory once seemed to promise. Have at it, Emory.
In other words, population genetics is, well, junk. Essentially, what's going on is that there's a lot of, the way the genome works is optimized to function, not to make calculating how it works easy. And because of that, a lot of the assumptions that the early population geneticists made, which, not to fault them, they were working with incomplete information. They had no clue how complicated the genome was. I'm not trying to rip on those guys. Like, these are incredibly smart people who put together some really pretty math. But the problem is, the math didn't get updated as we learned more about the genome. Everybody just kept using the old math. And now the math would, in order to do it, would be so complicated. I'm not even sure we have a computer that could do the math.
Exactly. The simplicity. I mean, I'm glad you're defending them in the sense that they're brilliant guys and they didn't have adequate information. I mean, some of the basis of Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection was like in 1917. I mean, we know so little then. This is even before Watson and Crick. All right. We just did not know. And in defense of my colleague and former boss, and my present colleague, John Sanford, he had a part in his genetic entropy book, 2005, where he talked about linkage. And he mentioned epistasis in passing, but he foresaw all the stuff intuitively that we were able to see mathematically. It took, when I came on the project, I said, hey, John, look, Joe Felsenstein's agreeing with you. I found this in his graduate level textbook. And Joe Felsenstein will work through the effect of linkage. This makes genetic entropy very problematic. Now, I will say something. If we are able to correlate complexity with what is selected for, so anything that could increase complexity, if we select for it, increase complexity in small steps, if we could theoretically or empirically demonstrate that that tends to be favored, then you have a correlation. You can say, just kind of like the weather reports where you say, there's a 30% chance of rain or 70% chance, rather than kind of doing the bird on the dung pile, it would rain or it won't rain. Once you start putting percentages of the correlation or anti-correlation, then you have a scientific theory. The problem is now it looks anti-correlated. Complexity, if let's say 90% of the beneficial mutations are anti-correlated to complexity, that's really bad. Now we can actually make testable predictions, and one of those is genetic deterioration. The genome is reducing, and even as Kunin said, reductive evolution is the dominant mode. Reductive evolution is the dominant mode of evolution. And so just a little turn on, it could become more complex or less complex. If we just say the tendency is to be less complex, now you have a testable theory with testable observable consequences. And so this is a prediction that the genomes worldwide will be deteriorating. We will have far more losses of genes than we are acquiring new major protein families. And so we're getting to the point now we can actually test this. The problem is it's looking like the way Darwin envisioned evolution is just not going to work. Couldn't have possibly worked in the past. Something else had to explain the progression of complexity in the fossil record. Emory?
Yeah, I mean, the Darwinian conception of evolution is effectively dead on arrival based on the way the population genetics is formulated. The only thing that I don't know that there is a way to salvage it. I I haven't seen any good opinions. Of course, that's probably because most of the people in the pop gen literature don't even realize that what they've done, what modern genetics has done to their dogma. So they aren't even really trying to fix the problems. They're just continuing on spewing out the same gobbledygook, even though it's completely incompatible with modern genetics.
So guys, I linked to this document. It's a draft document working, and Dr. Sanford wrote me today, and he said, "Thanks, Sal," which means, you know, I sent it to him last week, and he said, "I'll get to it this week," and he got to it this week, and he said, "Thanks, Sal." So he's reviewing it. We're going to rework this and put the references. So the references are in the Springer Nature. A lot of them are in the Springer Nature chapter, and maybe I'll link to a slightly earlier version of this that's on Ola Hosjer's website, one of my co-authors. He's a professor of population genetics in Stockholm, Sweden. And so I'll link to that. I'll also put in the video description a link to my paper on Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. It will have a lot of these references. And then you'll have this paper. So if you want to track this down. So Nice Girl said, "I'm new to this channel. Tonight's talk is confirming some things that I've been finding too." I'm really glad to hear that. Nice Girl, if you wish to say who you are, I mean, in terms of your qualifications and your field of interest, that would be valuable to the other graduate students here. We have PhDs and researchers that come to this website. This isn't your typical shouting high drama channel. It reflects kind of the scholarly approach I have toward the creation evolution controversy. And we have, oh yes, we have a lot of graduate students here, PhD levels, and Emory's a master's student, and we tend to cater to the nerds, and so that kind of helps lower the drama on here. And by the way, I'd like, you know, I've heard about you, Nice Girl, and your work. So if all I know about you is what you've said in public chats, that you are some sort of paleontologist, and I appreciate the kind words, by the way. So I don't know much else to add here. So Emory, if you have any more closing thoughts, we just got through this. I mean, do you think this document has any promise to be helpful to the larger community? This isn't quite as math intensive as our Springer Nature chapter. That was
I think so. My commentary would be to make sure that we are that you're presenting the context of the quote, so that evolutionists don't scream about quote mining, which they'll do anyway, but at least we can preempt it. And I think more importantly, if this document can be helpful, but it needs to be more than just like a ton of quotes, which is what it is right now. I think a formal paper where we walk through this and say, okay, here's not be a formal, you know, like research paper, like a little bit more formal style, where we go, okay, here's what the evolutionists themselves are saying. What does that mean? What does that mean for how we apply it within our own community? And I'm not saying you have to take a position on the whole natural selection is a myth versus natural selection isn't a myth, but what does it mean for how we use it in our own models? And I think this is something that maybe we could come back and do a show on at some point, is, okay, natural selection, the way they've been using it, is a complete flop. Fine. Do we still need it? And if we do, how do we use it? Because I mean, from the high caliber people and the high level papers that we've talked about tonight and last night, it's pretty obvious that natural selection is, well, a flop. At least the way they're currently using it. And so let's take 5 steps back and say, okay, let's go back to maybe what Edward Blythe said about natural selection. Let's go back to that, and let's restart. Let's retrace the chain of thought and say, okay, where was the mistake? do we still need this concept? Is it a useful concept? And if so, what do we do with it? And if not, how do we fix? And if not, what do we replace it with?
So Brainbug, and greetings again, Brainbug. We'll do a show on my criticism of flat earthism, God willing, and also geocentrism. Brainbug is very kind to invite me to talk about that. I'd be happy to come on your channel. And Brainbug says, we observe population genetics in extant population. It's an observation. And I thoroughly agree with that. So what we've been criticizing here, again, let's go back to the opening quote here, this organizing principle. Genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. So we actually do see like alleles or organisms with a set of alleles or traits, however you want to frame it. We have seen that that particular individual becomes more overrepresented, and that's a fitness gain in the population genetic sense. So I thoroughly agree that we observe population genetics in extant populations. It's an observation. The thing that is now problematic is we have, just in that title, in that one phrase, genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. So if you add just those two words, genomes decay, so sustained fitness gains, definitely, that's in line with mainstream population genetics. But the horrifying part is genomes decay. Genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. And that's the difference now in the way we're framing this, because if genomes decay and fitness tends to gain, and fitness is actually anti-correlated with complexity, or you could say fitness is correlated with genomic decay. That's really bad for Darwinian theory, and this could invite some simulations to see what's going to happen if there's a tendency to decay the genome, the natural quote-unquote Darwinian selection. I prefer the word, by the way, Emory, differential reproductive abundance. I don't like to use the word success, I just say abundance. DRA, differential reproductive abundance. That's the closest description of what they call natural selection, because I think the word natural selection is misleading.
I agree with you.
Oh my goodness.
No, I agree. Natural selection is a terrible term. Absolutely terrible term. Natural selection. I've tried to come up with better words for it, and I don't know that there really is one, but it is a terrible term. It implies things that aren't true.
So the reason I say differential reproductive abundance, that's exactly when you read Felsenstein's work or any population genetics work, it's like, don't call it natural selection. All you've described mathematically is differential reproductive abundance.
Mm-hmm.
From a it's stripped of its philosophical, teleological language, and it stops being misleading when you see it that way. There's maybe just a couple more comments before we shut down.
Yep.
Nice girl. This is, I have to say, this is inspiring to hear that your degrees are in geology and paleontology. And Nice girl says, I'm just interested in the evolution topic. That is all that is taught in university, but I have now switched to believe in ID. So that means there's probably a time you didn't believe in ID, and now you do. And hey, that's very, very. This is why this channel has been organized, to let people kind of express that conscience from their scientific viewpoint. And this is inspiring. So you made my day right here, nice girl. So thank you.
Yep. Sal, I think a show with a nice girl, if she's willing to come on and talk about that, would be in order.
Yes, we do try to protect people's anonymity. And,
right. Yeah. No, so don't view that as any pressure. Okay. That's not
right.
me. I operate under a pseudonym, so I completely understand the whole anonymity thing. Like, don't for a moment think that I'm trying to pressure you at all. But if you're open to it, I think that would be a cool conversation.
Yes, and you can interact in text on the in the comment section. I'll try to respond. Also, if you'd like to interact in the email, I'm going to post briefly my email, my public email. So I just posted it. I'm going to remove it shortly. So good night, girl. If you want to contact me just to kind of just talk privately through text, that's fine. Yeah. The reason I say text is one evolutionary biologist wrote me. I offered a private Zoom call, and he said, no, I can't do that. I prefer just to do text because I have to remain anonymous. I'm just like, okay, I get it. All right, because people try to get me taken out of school when I was just studying physics. And what did that have to do with evolutionary biology? But they're trying to get me, they targeted me at Johns Hopkins. So, you know, there's a bounty on my head too. So I know what that's like. Mm-hmm. So I want to respect people's privacy because I'm under the gun too. There's a bounty on my head.
Yeah, we completely understand that.
I mean, I was going to the NIH graduate school, and I'm like, holy smokes, if you know these guys recognize me. And then my boss gives a talk at the NIH, and that caused a scandal. John Sanford, who's a creationist. So, nice girl. Feel free to email me, and just to if you want to correspond. I've had other grad students and professionals in science. And I wish you well. You definitely made my day.
Yeah, and if you for some reason lose Sal's email, my email is posted publicly on my channel. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'll forward it to Sal. I've got Sal's email, so that's no problem.
Oh, do you want to post yours briefly and then?
No, I don't want to post it in the chat, but it's easy to find if you know where to look on YouTube for it. There is a public email available. So if you don't, if you for some reason lose Sal's email and want to get in contact with him, you know, just get a hold of me. I'll put you in touch. It's not a problem. I'm more than happy to do that.
All right. Well, Emory, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy guy. I'm glad it seems you're on a semester break, and I'm hoping you'll graduate at the top of your class.
So far, so good.
Yeah, so far, so good. You know, Paul Nelson said people like us have to be a little bit better than the competition given who we are, you know, to make it harder for us to be thrown out of school.
Yeah.
And you know, that's just, we have to show excellence. And, you know, you know, the nice girl, thank you for what you said in the side chat. That should be inspiring to a lot of people. And I don't, you know, I think I've run out of everything I needed to say. Oh, to comment on this document that has been the focus of what we're talking about. It is, you know, we needed something to introduce the topic to the general engineering group who have no, you know, exposure to a lot of biology, much less population genetics. And so this is an opportunity to kind of introduce the topic. The problem is then we had this kind of high-powered paper that was 70 pages long that meant to be 140 pages, the chapter, the spring, and that's just like a quantum leap. There's nothing in between. So maybe the project that you had suggested is to have something a little bit more worked out and fleshed out. And who knows, maybe that would be a 500-page paper that really does work it out with examples, and it would be a textbook. Maybe that's what it would take to show all this, because I'm very passionate about people actually learning the biology, the population genetics, and understanding proteins. This is a big task, but I think what I'm finding is as we have people with expertise in these fields and they start to have doubts, they sometimes feel isolated and think, you know, am I just the only one thinking the emperor has no clothes? Mm-hmm. And so a document like this could be reassuring. So, Emory, I'll give you can you say a prayer? We'll close in a prayer, especially for Arctic timber wolf who had his eye injured with shrapnel.
Oh, yes.
if you have a closing word and then a prayer, and that'll be it for tonight.
Shameless plug. Everybody go subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Other than that, continue coming back to Sal. I mean, Sal is significantly smarter than I am. So, just please keep coming back. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of interesting content that he's going to be posting. So hang in there. I'm sure we'll have, and I'll probably be back around periodically as my graduate school semester permits. So thanks everybody for tuning out tonight. Appreciate it. Everybody's been a very intelligent chat tonight, which for YouTube is not common. So thank you all very much for your contributions, and we will see you all next time. I'll go ahead and close in a word of prayer. Dear God, our Heavenly Father, I humbly come before you, praising and glorifying you, Lord, for the day you've given to us. Thank you for the opportunity we have to serve you today. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the great blessing that it is. Thank you for allowing us to discuss this topic tonight. Thank you for allowing us to grow and to learn. Thank you for allowing us to study your natural world, even though it's fallen. And Lord, I pray, Lord, that you will help us to honor you and praise you in everything we say and do as we study. And Lord, I pray you'll give us all a good night's rest and help us to wake refreshed and ready to serve you tomorrow. I ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Take care, and God bless you.